welcome everyone to the Early Learning Cross-POC meeting. As you all know, this is our opportunity to come together at ED to talk about the early learning efforts that are happening across ED programs. And today we're going to have a guest speaker, and I'm very happy to have them join us. They're coming to us from IES. IES some years ago did a contract to build what they called early learning networks. And today we're having a presentation about those networks. And I want to turn it over to Carolyn Eubanks so that she could then introduce our guests here today, and so that we could get moving forward with our presentation for today. And thank you all for joining.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and just want to welcome, I'm going to introduce our presenters and then we'll get started, but just a couple logistical things. Summer Fusak, who hopefully you can see on your screen if you're in Zoom, is letting people into the meeting, and she's also going to manage the chat for us during the meeting. The way we have this structured is that the three presenters will share about the Early Learning Network, and then we will have a time for question and answers at the end. If you have a pressing question as the presenters are speaking, you can include that in the chat. For folks who are with us by phone only, we'll also provide an opportunity to take questions if you're a phone only and not connecting via the Zoom link. Summer, do you mind going to the agenda slide? So just to give everyone an overview, usually we have an hour meeting. Today it's a little longer because we wanted to provide enough time for you to get a good understanding of the network projects, and also for us to answer any questions that you have. So the lead team will present. So we'll first hear from Dr. Sue Sheridan, who you guys have a bio. If you have the Outlook invite, there is a bio of the presenters, but I'll just say a couple things about Sue, professional things, and then a couple personal things. So Dr. Sue Sheridan is the George Holmes University Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She is a founding director of the Nebraska Center for Research on Children, Youth, Families, and Schools, and she's Associate Dean for Research and Creative Activity in UNL's College of Education and Human Sciences, which makes me wonder how she has so much time to do all the amazing work she's done for the network. She's not only the network lead for the Early Learning Network, but in addition to the network lead grant, IES also funded 5 research teams, and Sue is the principal investigator for one of those teams. I want to thank her and Summer and Lisa Kanoki and the rest of the UNL team for just doing an excellent job in terms of providing leadership for the network. And so Sue will speak today on behalf of all of the network teams and share about the objectives and the work that's been done to date. In addition to hearing from Sue, you will also hear from Dr. Deborah Vandal, who is the current PI for the University of California at Irvine assessment team grants. So we funded 5 research team grants, assessment team grant. The assessment team grant was made to Dr. Carol Connor, and Deborah has been a part of the project from the beginning as co-PI. She took over the role of PI earlier this year, sadly, after the passing of Dr. Carol Connor, but Deborah and the rest of the University of California Irvine team is continuing the assessment work that you will hear more about. So Dr. Deborah Vandal is Chancellor's Professor of Education Emerita at the University of California Irvine, where she served as the founding dean of the School of Education, and where she is in her role on the network, carrying on the wonderful work started by Dr. Carol Connor and the rest of the team there. And I thank Deborah for doing that. And you will also hear from Dr. Ashley Adams, who is an assistant professor in Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences Department at San Diego State University. Ashley has worked on, Dr. Adams has worked as a postdoctoral scholar on the UC Irvine assessment team grant since 2017, and she worked with Carol and other members of the team to develop the Optimizing Learning Opportunities for Students, OLOS, as we call it, observation system you'll hear about today. And so I will now turn it over to Sue, who will give the lead team presentation, and then you will hear from Deborah and Ashley for the assessment team presentation. And thank you again. And a special welcome and thanks to Deborah and Ashley for joining us very early from California. So I hope you all enjoy the presentation. And again, please share any questions you have in the chat, or if you're by phone only, we'll provide an opportunity for you to ask questions later.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you everyone for allowing us to come and chat with you today about something that really is very important, and that is the Early Learning Network, which is a network of researchers coming together to answer some really important questions for the field of early childhood education and development, funded by IES, and we're just really excited about all the work that's been done and the findings that we're generating and the implications that they have for practice and policy. So as Caroline mentioned, I'm Sue Sheridan. I'm the co-lead of the Early Learning Network with Dr. Lisa Kanoki, who is also on the call today. Also with me today is Summer Fosak. Caroline introduced her already, and she is the project manager for the lead. Dana Ludvik is our communications and media specialist, doing a fabulous job with all of our communication outreach. You're going to hear a lot about that today. And Hinata Gomez, who is a doctoral candidate at UNL. So the mission of the network is to advance the understanding of policies and practices that narrow the achievement gap and maintain early learning success as children transition from preschool to elementary school and beyond. So the primary goal is to address the achievement gap by identifying malleable factors, which is important, malleable factors that are associated with early learning and development, not only in preschool, but over the pre-K to grade 3 continuum, and then to turn these findings into practice and policy recommendations. The children that we're concerned about are those that are growing up in disadvantaged conditions, including poverty, and we have a fair amount of racial and ethnic diversity in our samples across the research and assessment teams. On the next slide, you will see a graphic depicting the geographic diversity of our studies. As Caroline mentioned, there are 5 research teams, and those teams are conducting their research in states and communities that are geographically dispersed and in urban, suburban, and rural contexts. MDRC's work is occurring in Boston Public Schools. University of Virginia's work is occurring, they're doing their research in Fairfax County, Virginia. The North Carolina team is working across the state of North Carolina, as is Ohio, but in Ohio, the primary focus is in Columbus. Here in Nebraska, we are doing a statewide survey of children pre-K to grade 3 across both urban and rural contexts. The 6th team, who you will meet later this morning, is located at the University of California in Irvine. And that team is focused on developing and validating an observational tool that's useful for practitioners. So I'll start with, on the next slide, a summary of the research studies that each of the teams individually and collectively are conducting. Each research team is focused on 3 particular studies. The first is a descriptive study of systems level policies and practices that support early learning. So we're all doing some qualitative work, we're doing some quantitative work, really trying to understand that sort of broad macro context that's influencing young children's early learning. And the second study is a deeper dive into practices that are occurring in classrooms from pre-K through 3rd grade in order to identify teaching practices and other classroom level malleable factors that are associated with school readiness and achievement. Again, it's a deep dive into pre-K, kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3 classrooms, looking at things like individual student experiences, teacher-student interactions, etc. The 3rd study is exciting. This is a longitudinal study where we are monitoring and tracking children, the same children from pre-K through 3rd grade, to identify malleable factors that are associated with early learning and achievement over time. So we're really looking at trajectories of learning and development in this target group of students who are growing up in disadvantage. Of note, now some of these studies, and in particular this 3rd longitudinal study, includes a sample of children who did not attend publicly funded pre-K. So this is allowing us to understand the unique experiences and the benefits of publicly funded pre-K, both immediately and over time. We want to understand how these children, who we're calling attenders, differ from those who did not attend pre-K, with the goal of uncovering how their trajectories look over time and how and what might be responsible for their achievement and their social emotional functioning by third grade. And while we have a shared purpose across all the three studies, each team is approaching these in their unique ways with some of their own priorities and areas of emphasis that will really not only collectively but individually advance the field's understandings. On the next slide, you'll see that these 5 network teams and, as appropriate, the assessment team have agreed upon some measures that are being collected in common across all of the sites. This is significant because it'll allow us to answer these important questions about the achievement gap and malleable factors, children's transitions and successes on a broader scale than any of us could have done alone. When collected by one team, there's some important information that we can learn in relationship to our unique questions. But because we're collecting some common measures from many of the sites, the impact of our knowledge and ultimately the potential for sharing new knowledge will have much greater relevance for practice and policy. So we're collecting a handful of measures related to child, family, and teacher demographics, to children's developmental outcomes, particularly in reading, language, and social emotional functioning, classroom environments, instructional practices, and some really important school and community contextual factors as well. So what are we finding? I'm going to try and summarize very briefly some of the key findings to date. And I'll start with a couple of thematic areas that have been explored really over the course of this 4 years. Now we're into our 5th year of this network projects. These findings did emerge early, and some preliminary findings associated with each of them are summarized in various formats on our webpage. I'm going to take a minute right now to shout out to Dana and her team, who really have put together just a fabulous, a tremendous website and a number of different communications tools and strategies. And we're going to ask you to spend some time looking at that and to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, because the social media and integrated communication strategies we're using are really at the heart of our ability to have the kind of impact on practice and policy that we want and expect to have. So on this slide, you'll see some general findings in 5 of many thematic areas that we've been exploring. On the slides that Caroline shared with you all, if you click on any one of these terms, family engagement or alignment or preschool attendance, et cetera, you will be able to dig into some of the findings for yourself. For example, if you click on family engagement, as Summer just did, you'll navigate to a story on our website that's summarizing some of the findings that are associated with family engagement. And as she's scrolling down, you'll see there's findings that are key takeaways for practice, and we have some policy recommendations. And there's a host of other information. I think if you keep going, Summer, you'll see that there are resources here that you can click to go to things like practice guides and research papers, all on this theme of family engagement. And we have very similar content for other themes where individual studies are contributing to our knowledge about these malleable factors influencing the trajectory of development from pre-K to grade 3. Now back on our website, on the next slide, you will see some collective findings of the network. Again, whereas some of the other findings to date that I just sort of shared with you on the previous slide are emanating from individual studies, we're also looking, and this is a key aspect and purpose really of the network, we're looking collectively and collaboratively to identify findings that represent the network across studies. And one of our shared research questions is associated with identifying how to maintain the preschool boost as children who experience publicly funded pre-K advance through elementary school. So teams are coming together, the 5 research teams in particular, are coming together to identify malleable factors that can help maintain that boost when we see children progress through school. in other words, we're identifying practices and policies that can produce lasting benefits on learning and development for children engaged in publicly funded pre-K. So I'll summarize some of the key findings. In a nutshell, skill building is one of these malleable factors that we are identifying as being capable of maintaining the pre-K boost. Skill building prepares young learners to have long-term success, but also sustained environments is a second malleable factor. Again, that collectively we're finding prepares young children and young learners to reach their full potential as they progress through their school career. Skill building, obviously an individual child characteristic that is necessary to provide the foundational skills that they need to be successful in the pre-K environment and with each grade. But sustained environments is also something that we're seeing is important along that trajectory. This collective findings topic related to skill building has a host of information that is emanating from the collective studies, and finding that children who attend high quality pre-K programs do gain critical cognitive language and literacy and social emotional skills. There's strong evidence for that, we know that. But collectively, we are finding some factors that promote skill building, both in the classroom and at the policy level in the early grades and beyond. So for example, in the classroom and through policy initiative, we're uncovering the importance of teaching children to master not only basic skills such as numbers and letters and sounds, which is important for promoting that boost to begin with, but also teaching complex, what we're calling unconstrained skills like vocabulary and comprehension. These seem particularly important for maintaining that boost. And again, if you click on this hyperlink, Summer, go ahead and do that for skill building. You'll find information on what we're finding collectively across the skill building domain, these various malleable factors that come together. And we're communicating these findings through things like a video, a news feature. If you scroll down a little bit more, there's all kinds of information just integrated really nicely around this particular malleable factor of skill building. The next general malleable malleable factor that we've uncovered, again, it was born in the literature well before our time, but we are uncovering not only the importance of sustained environments, but malleable factors to promote sustained environments so that children's gain over time can be maintained. What we're finding here is that the children exposed to high quality environments, not only in pre-K, but across the elementary years is important. And again, not only in classrooms, but also across all learning environments, such as schools and homes. There's many ways that teachers, parents, and policymakers can help foster this high quality learning experience. And we're finding that it's really essential that we provide the supports and practices to meet children's needs, but ensure high quality relationships exist for children over time. Not only adult-child relationships, but relationships between parents and teachers as well. So if you go to the, we're not going to do this now just for the purpose of time, but if you go to the link, you will find stories and best practices and videos and a lot of other resources that all embellish our findings associated with sustained environments and how they do maintain the pre-K boost. The next slide summarizes some of the products. I just summarized very, very briefly some of these core findings to date. We have a lot of work yet to do, both individually as teams, but really importantly, as a collaborative network. So stay tuned for that. But I want to share with you just a summary of the various products that we have that you can turn to now and over time as more and more findings come out from the network, because this is critical. We are functioning as a network for a primary purpose of getting information out to the field so that we can enhance and improve practices and policies. So we're really working hard at generating very accessible and user-friendly products using a variety of mediums to target various audiences that we are interested in and that we think will be interested in us and our findings. For the primary communications tools that are being used to convey our findings include blogs, practice guides, policy briefs, and webinars. But we put those up there, and it's kind of arbitrary because frankly, all of our products are very, very powerful in their own way. You'll see on this slide that we do identify some potential target audiences that we're thinking about very intentionally as we're creating these products. But we do also recognize that these products really can stand alone as ways to influence lots and lots of stakeholders. So let's go into each of those a little bit and start with the blogs. I think our blogs are perhaps one of our most detailed communications mediums. These provide information about key findings for a range of audiences. They allow the voices of both our researchers and in many cases field-based partners across the network to provide their own unique insights and their work. Here you'll see a screenshot from some of the blogs. We have several blogs. This is one of the go-to places that I would encourage you to follow. And as you're following us on Twitter and on social media, these kinds of these stories get pushed out very, very frequently. Again, I don't have time to go into the depth of what's contained herein, but so I won't navigate to the website for you right now, but all of these are contained on the website. And if you click the link that is illustrated here as a hyperlink on the slide, when you receive the slides from Caroline, you will be able to get there very readily. Practice Guides is another one of our products that we are very excited about. I mean, we are really working hard to translate the findings in real time from the scholarly sort of audiences to practice audiences. This is what we're about, right? And so our practice guides are intended to provide very user-friendly information for field-based practitioners that would include agency administrators, school practitioners, teachers. We really want to do the work of translating those findings for them so that they can quickly integrate it into their daily practices. Policy briefs is a very, conceptually a very similar kind of product because our interest is not only changing practice, but changing policy, which is, I think, as all of us know, where it really has to happen. So if you click on the links here on this page, you'll see that our research findings are also being translated to information that's relevant for policymakers and decision makers. These are relatively new right now. We're just pushing these out. So you'll see a handful on our website, but there will be many more forthcoming in the near future. Another product is our webinars. We've hosted a number of webinars over the last 4.5 years. Some have been for practitioners, some for researchers that are interested in moving their research from the research platform to a policy arena. And they're archived on our website. We partnered with True North in Washington, D.C. and that part of the country, who really helped us get our heads around, how to begin communicating in ways that is policy or that are policy relevant. So that's really rich with how-to kind of information with that objective in mind. A couple other products, again, like I said, it was sort of arbitrary that we picked those four because the other information that's available on our website is also hugely important. One thing that I did want to point out is just the site where you can find publications that are emanating from the network teams currently. These are on the website. There's a URL and a PDF link, or I'm sorry, there's a URL and a link to that page on the screen that you see in front of you. And when possible, we did include PDFs of the original research studies. Please visit this page when you can, because I think you'll be impressed with the range of scholarly activity and the volume of scholarly activity of our researchers and their contributions to the science of early childhood education and development as a function of network funding. So we're really, we have some of the, if not the best researchers in early childhood as part of this network, and they are really producing critically important work. Also, that scholarly work obviously has to be translated into practice. We have best practice guides. We talked a little bit about that, but we really focused our efforts on some very tangible information that can be accessible in the practice domain. We've done a lot of dissemination of our findings, and this is exciting. The conference presentations, many of the conference presentations that you're going to see on our website are presentations that we've done together. We've had symposia, we've had other sessions at national conferences, and you'll see all of those kind of fresh off the press kinds of findings before they make it into the journals on the website under conference presentations. A couple other things. The videos are very exciting. I wish I could have had time to share some video today, because I think that one of the most engaging and exciting aspects of our dissemination strategy are the videos that are being produced on a whole range of topics, including, for example, those 5 thematic areas that I drew out for you earlier, and the malleable factors of skill building and sustained environments. And there's videos on practices associated with literally closing the achievement gap and dealing with racial inequities. I mean, there's a lot of really important things that are coming through our videos, and I encourage you to take a look. We have focus newsletters. The ELN Focus is the name of our newsletters. Again, here's a plug for following us on Twitter, because this is where we push out the newsletters, and these newsletters get pushed out frequently. I'm believing it's something like monthly. We're pushing out newsletters that have a focused area. That's why we call it the ELN Focus, but a range of different stories and video and interviews and things like that, representing that thematic area, that focus area. They come out regularly. I do think we will find them really interesting. It's a quick read, but everything is all there in that one place. Finally, I just want to help you a little bit in terms of navigating our content on our website. It is a work in progress. We're always modifying things on our website to make it easier to access information that people need in an organized way. So currently, I think the best way, if you're interested in getting information on a topical thematic area that the network is tackling, I encourage you to go to the news section of our website. Okay, this is where you'll find the most timely research findings coming out of the network. So on the news button, maybe Summer, you can kind of circle where that is on this page here. You'll see news. The easiest way to navigate is to go here and then to select a category of interest. You'll see the arrow on this screenshot pointing to category. Here, the categories are going to be listed out, whether it be skill building or feeling engagement or transitions, alignment. There's a host of categories that are these thematic areas where you can find information, again, through various communication mediums to kind of pull all that information together for you in one place. Clicking on any of the categories is going to show you a range of resources, a range of findings on that topic. And we are keeping this very up to date. Every new publication that comes out, every new conference presentation that's conducted, you know, all of the things that the teams are working on individually and together, we're pulling together and putting the information up as quickly as possible as it's coming out. And on this final slide, you will see actually these categories as listed, at least a handful in the first screenshot that we were able to capture for you. So I really do encourage you to go here and check out what is available and areas that are of interest to you and your constituents. Again, I think it's the easiest way to get information. We really do trust that you will find it really chock full of highly relevant area to your work. And we're excited to get your feedback, and we're excited to learn from you all about what's important for your agencies, for your offices, for the folks that you represent, and let us know how we can be more relevant to the practice and policy communities. So that, in a nutshell, is what we've been doing as researchers and as the lead for the Early Learning Network. I'm now going to turn it over to Deborah Vandal and Ashley Adams, who are going to talk about the work that's happening with OLOS.
Thank you, Sue, for everything that you've been doing as the lead for the Early Learning Network. It's been a really outstanding job that you and your team have been doing. And I want to thank Caroline for this opportunity to update IES and HHS staff on the work that's being done at UC Irvine and San Diego State University, where we are working as part of the assessment team. Our efforts are really focused on optimizing learning opportunities for students, or OLOS, which is an assessment tool that we're going to be talking about today and sharing how the tool works and some initial findings from using the tool. If we could go to the next slide. OLOS is based on the research of the late Professor Carol Connor, who pioneered the development of assessment and observation tools that share several features. Carol's work used a technology platform to collect and analyze assessment and observation data for individual students. The focus in these observation tools that she developed over a 20-year period has been looking at the specifics of literacy instruction and math instruction in classrooms as they are experienced by individual children in those classrooms. Observers record the duration of specific types of instruction received by individual students, and observers record the frequency of specific types of teacher and student actions during instruction. These duration and frequency codes were found in Carol's previous work to predict reading and math achievement over the school year. At the end of this presentation, we've included a list of articles that have appeared over a 20-year period, as well as some of the summary findings from RCTs using this assessment and observation systems that are focused on individual students that you can go to for the background of Carol's previous research. Next slide. The OLOS work extends Carol Connor's work in several ways. First, it's appropriate for pre-K children as well as for K to third grade children. In her earlier work, Carol was really focusing on the elementary school years. This work is now also looking at pre-K children. It's going to be including observations, or it is including observations of play and social emotional learning, as well as literacy and math instruction. And the observation measure and assessment tools are designed to be administered by practitioners and teachers, as well as by researchers. Next slide. Here's an overview of the Early Learning Network OLOS observations. Over a 2-year period, 2018-19 and then 2019-20, we conducted observations 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring. For the pre-K classrooms, we conducted half-day observations of instruction. For the K to third grade classrooms, following Connor's other work, we focused on literacy blocks and math blocks during the day. all observations were videotaped at the 5 early learning network sites. And then those videotaped observations were returned to the UCI lab where they've all been coded by reliable and trained OLOS coders. In addition, we trained observers at each of the 5 early learning network sites to also conduct live observations. In these live observations, the observations are done in 40-minute cycles where observers look at 3 children for 15 minutes, then the teacher, then those same 3 children for 15 minutes, then the teacher, and then they cycle to the next number of children in the classroom until the end of the literacy and math blocks have occurred, or until the end of the half-day observation. Next slide. Using that format, we've now coded pre-K, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade classrooms. You'll see here a summary of those observations across the fall, winter, and spring. And if you look at the red font at the bottom of the table, you'll see the total numbers of observations, classrooms, and numbers of children, with 157 classrooms observed in the fall, 1,382 children then, 122 classrooms in the winter, with 1,121 children observed, and then 57 classrooms in the spring with 513 classrooms. That decrease in the spring is COVID. So this would have been last spring that we have a decrease in where we were no longer able to get into classrooms. You'll also notice looking at this table that a fair number of observations were done with pre-K, which was the real focus for this study, to be able to extend the Connor observations of literacy and math instruction to younger children, and to also incorporate the use of play. Next slide. So what is it that the observers are doing when they're in these classrooms? And if you look on the right, you'll see an example of one of the screens of the iPad screens that were used. In this case, this is an observation of Liam. As you'll recall, the OLOS observations are really focusing on the individual children's experiences in classrooms. So here we're going to see Liam, and that front top row, we'll see he's on task. The content area that he's being instructed is literacy. It's occurring, if you'll see on the 3rd row, in a small group with peers on the 4th row. And then we'll see the instruction type is meaning focused, meaning it's a literacy activity that's focusing on areas around comprehension. So what is the, that would be things like, what is the character doing? What comes next in the story? What happened before? You'll also see that the instruction type is marked on there. Next slide. In addition to these duration codes, which are recorded in seconds, we also see frequency codes are being collected. And this examination of frequency is focusing on the kinds of discourse that are happening in the classroom. And these codes were first developed by Connor in another project, which is learning from text. And here, if you look on the bottom half of the screen, where it says moves, this is where you're going to be seeing the frequency codes that become progressively more complex and sophisticated, starting with nonverbal responding, nodding, verbal responses to a question, reading text to problems aloud, or answering questions that require reasoning, or asking on-topic questions, or using text to justify a response, or participating in a discussion. In addition, added in OLOS are some SEL codes, social emotional learning codes, which are new. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see what those actions would be. Include in a challenging situation that the child uses words or that moves away from a difficult situation. Next slide, please. Also, there are screens that observers could use. So for example, this is an observation of Lucas, we see at the top of the screen. Lucas is on task, and the content area for instruction here is math, as we see on the second row. Now, it would have also been possible for Lucas to have another content area for instruction, and in which case other would have been clicked by the observer, and that could include science, social studies, arts. Also, we see non-instruction, which would be areas like transition, or the teacher going through plans for the day in which there are no specific instruction. But in this case, Lucas is in math, and that math is occurring, as we see in the context codes, in whole class, and the teacher is managing that instruction or leading that instruction. And then we see the instruction type is focused on number knowledge. It also could be that the instruction would be examining number operations, or algebra, or geometry, or applied math. Next slide. The question then is, so what do we do with these codes? And now we're going to turn to Ashley Adams, who's going to help us see some of the kinds of questions and insights that we can gather from the OLOS coding system.
Thanks, Deborah. So in the following slides, I'm going to show you some examples of summary results from data collected in the 18-19 school year. In each graph, the y-axis represents the average minutes of each type of instruction we observed on a given day, and the different grade levels are represented along the x-axis. So on the left, we can see the amount of time that individual students were spending in code-focused literacy instruction. And these are activities like letter names and sounds, phonics, and other activities that support word reading. And then on the right, you can see the amount of time children spent in meaning-focused literacy instruction. And again, that's instruction that supports the variety of abilities needed for successful reading comprehension. In our observed classrooms, individual pre-K students were receiving about 5 minutes of the code-focused literacy instruction during our half-day observations. Kindergarten students received the most, about 25 minutes of code-focused instruction. First and second graders, about 10 minutes, and by third grade, very little code-focused instruction, about 2 minutes per day. At all grade levels, students were receiving much more meaning-focused literacy instruction, about 15 minutes a day in pre-K, 35 minutes in kindergarten, and about 45 minutes per day in first, second grades. Next slide. On this slide, we see summary findings of the context of classroom instruction. So we can see the average number of minutes spent in whole class, small group, and individual instruction. At all 5 grade levels, whole class instruction was the most common type, although pre-K students were also receiving a good amount of small group instruction. Small group instruction, however, was much less common in the K to 3rd grade classrooms, occurring for about 10 minutes of the literacy and math blocks, and for about 5 minutes in the 3rd grade classrooms. So a question we've asked ourselves is, what might be the implications of the time spent in different types and contexts of instruction? Next slide. And a central question in Dr. Connor's work was how best to support teachers in aligning instruction to individual children's learning needs. And to address this question, the Connor Laboratory integrated the classroom observation work that was going on of individual students' opportunities to learn with assessments of individual students' literacy, math, and self-regulation skills, which are assessed using A2I software, with the ultimate goal, again, being to support teachers in aligning their instruction with individual children's learning needs. Next slide. So from those individual assessments of student literacy and math skills, A2I algorithms developed by Dr. Connor through years of classroom observation and child assessment work compute a recommended amount of each type of instruction that should uniquely support each child's learning needs. Then the power of the observational data is that it allows us to compute how well the actual instruction we observe aligns to those recommended amounts. And it's this distance from recommendation that's been a recurring and strong predictor of child outcomes in Connor's work. I'm going to show you next what these distances from recommendation look like on average in classrooms observed as part of the early learning network. So in these next two slides, negative numbers indicate that the observed amount of instruction was less than the recommended amount, or that children aren't getting enough of that type of instruction according to the A2I algorithms. Next slide. So here's an example from analyses that were conducted using the first year of OLOS observation to determine distance from recommendation. On the left-hand side of the slide, we can see that children in pre-K, first, second, and third grade were receiving less teacher-managed code-focused instruction than recommended. Based on this analysis, 14 more minutes of teacher-managed code-focused instruction was recommended for children in pre-K and in third grade. On the right slide, on the right side of the screen, you can see the value of really digging down into individual sites. So each of the colored bars represents a different site. So you can see there's quite a bit of variability between sites and between grades. Some sites and grade levels were closer to recommendation than others. Next slide. In contrast, for those same classrooms and same sites, we saw that the amount of teacher-managed meaning-focused instruction was on average greater than the recommended amount, ranging from about 2 minutes over in pre-K to about 10 minutes over per day in kindergarten. And again, we note that there's substantial within and between site variability, like you can see on the right-hand side. We don't in principle assume that too much meaning-focused instruction is necessarily a bad thing, but we do think of the literacy block as a zero-sum game. That is, there's only a certain number of available minutes in a given day, and how they're allocated to teaching of different literacy skills is important. Next slide. Here, what I'm showing you is a preview of work to come. So analyses are underway that are focusing on math instruction. On the left side of the screen, you can see the different types and amounts of math instruction that were available to children in the different grade levels. You can see a focus on number operations and number knowledge with some applied math as children increase in grade levels, very little work happening in math in the pre-K space, and very little work overall in algebra and geometry across grades. Also, you can see on the right-hand side, the average amount of non-instruction that we observed per day. Often roughly the same amount of math instruction we also saw spent in non-instructional activities, which again are things like transitions, talking about classroom roles, getting prepared for the day. A substantial amount of time, almost 40 minutes in pre-K and K classrooms was spent in non-instruction. Next slide. So because of our focus on the use of this tool for practitioners, we spent a lot of time developing a teacher feedback dashboard. So for individual teachers, as soon as an observation is completed, they're able to see summary data, like you see here, related to how much of each type of content and context of instruction was observed. They can also use a drop-down menu to see breakdowns for individual children. Next slide. And they're able to see what kinds of important student and teacher talk occurred during the observation. So for example, here we see a large amount of lower level participation on behalf of the students, such as nonverbal responding and responding to simple questions. While the teacher on the right-hand side, you can see also primarily engaged in lower level talk, like inviting students to share or summarizing a student's response, along with classroom management moves like redirecting student misbehavior. However, in both the student and teacher talk, you can see that there's a lack of higher level talk occurring in the classroom, and this would likely stand out to the teacher. Again, the teacher can see both classroom level summaries like you see here and breakdowns for each child observed. Next slide. So to tell you about our next steps and future directions, we've got a number of plans for 2021 and 2022. Near the top of that list is the finalization of the development of an online training module that can be implemented with practitioners as well as the research community. And then we want to test those materials in a practitioner feasibility study to determine the amount of time that novices need to become reliable observers and skilled users in the field, and to find out what practitioners are liking and disliking about the system and the way the data is presented to them, and how well those distance from recommendations are used in coaching sessions with teachers. We then plan for a series of OLOS papers that will provide primary documentation of the measure and also that describe learning opportunities in literacy, math, and other subject areas across the grade levels in our full sample from all network sites. We're planning additional predictive validity analyses, that is, what things that we can capture with OLOS that are predictive of academic growth, with a particular focus on literacy instruction in pre-K, K, and first grade, and math instruction across the 5 grade levels. We certainly have a full agenda for the next couple of years. Next slide. So in conclusion, we're really excited about the potential of OLOS as a tool for researchers and practitioners, and to continue the important work that Dr. Connor envisioned. And we thank you for allowing us to share with you today. And I'll turn it back over to Summer to moderate our Q&A session.